Hi everyone, welcome to Using Active Classroom to Support English Language Learners, hosted by socialstudies.com. I'm Alyssa Knowles, a facilitated trainer and with Active Classroom and a elementary media specialist. Today we have a very special guest. Not only has she taught social studies in high school, college, and been an innovative thinker on the district level, she is currently a social studies consultant. She is also my great friend, and we're extremely excited to have you today, Jana Kirchner. So before I turn the screen over to Jana, please notice the chat feature on the right-hand side. Post any questions or comments, and Jana will get to them and provide feedback as soon as she can. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the session over to Jana. So, again, welcome Jana, and welcome participants.
Hi everyone, I'm Jana Kirchner. I am excited to be with you tonight for our webinar of using Active Classroom to support English language learners. Let me tell you briefly a little bit about myself. Melissa, thank you for that introduction. I am a recently retired Kentucky educator with a background in high school social studies and English teaching. I also taught at university in social studies methods and recently retired as an instructional supervisor for a school district in Kentucky. So I'm excited to be with you now. This current phase of life, I'm doing some work with socialstudies.com and working with social studies professional learning and instructional coaching. So one of my favorite things to talk about is Active Classroom. So I'm excited that you're joining us. Please, at any time, like Melissa said, feel free to comment and add comments or questions to the chat box. There are a couple of times in the session I will stop talking and let you give some feedback, so kind of watch with that, and at any time feel free to add comments as you would like. We're going to start tonight with this general overview of the webinar and start with what are some barriers to learning for English language learners. And I want us to think about that for a second, and also the concept of what we mean by text in social studies, and we'll think about that, and then we'll spend most of our time talking about some big ideas, strategies to help students who are English language learners, and how Active Classroom resources and features can help you meet those needs. Text-to-speech features that are built into Active Classroom, and then how do you find those resources when you need them. So you'll see throughout the presentation that I have screenshotted a lot of the Active Classroom slides, so I'll show you how to do that. We're not going to do that live, we're going to do that with screenshots to make that a little bit more manageable. But we're going to start off with this first question. So if you will use the chat feature, hi Devin, glad you could join us. If you'll use the chat feature and comment, what are some barriers to learning for English language learners? Give me some feedback on that from your experience. So we got one comment, include reading and speaking in front of class. A lot of students who are English language learners don't have the confidence to share their answers with others. Absolutely. We're going to talk about some strategies that you can use to help with that, because there often is a confidence issue in speaking. Thank you for that feedback. While we're waiting for other feedback, I'm going to say one of the experiences I had with students is that English language learners often don't have the context to understand academic vocabulary. And many of the things we're going to talk about in our webinar tonight also apply to all struggling readers or struggling learners. So you'll see some transfer there to students maybe who aren't English language learners, but just are struggling readers. So we're going to talk about some strategies for how do we help remove some of those barriers. Other barriers we know sometimes are that English language learners come to our classroom with a variety of levels of ability, even in their own native language. And so that sometimes is a challenge. With some barriers with conversational English, which is easier to manage than specific academic vocabulary. Another comment, thank you for that, Amy, is that they only get to learn English at school. So sometimes when they go home, they don't get that continuous practice. So thank you for those comments. Let's see if we can talk about some strategies and some active classroom resources to help with those challenges. So I wanted to also think for just a second, so we have sort of a common language about what I want to call social studies text. And if you notice on the slide, I put that in quotes because I want us to think about text as the idea of anything we use for students to make meaning from. Let me say that again. Text in social studies is anything we use or any source we use for students to make meaning from and understand the content. So I put some pictures on the slide that I want us to think about that maybe sometimes we don't. And that in social studies, we teach by using maps, we teach by using newspaper articles, graphs, pictures, a variety of primary and secondary sources, our textbook, video clips. I want you to kind of think about all of those things as text and think about also how those barriers we talked about for learning definitely apply as we get into these specific academic texts that we use in social studies. Welcome, John. Glad you could join us. So think about that. When I say text, what do we mean by social studies text? Always kind of have these ideas in your mind as we go forward. So I want us to think about 5 big ideas, and that's what I wanted to spend our time together talking about. 5 strategies or big ideas to help English language learners. And we're going to take each of these in some small chunks. So I hope that there's something that I talk about tonight that will be useful for you and your classes and your students. As always, take it, adapt it to whatever grade level or content you teach, and you know your learners better than anyone. Also, feel like I need to have a statement that I think is common sense, but I want to put it out there up front that all learners are different, and I don't want to generalize about any language learners, just like all kids are different. So as always, adapt this to the specific needs of your students in your classroom. So we're going to look at some of these big ideas of building background knowledge, having a clear purpose for lessons and using active reading strategies, teach and reinforce content vocabulary, chunk text into small sections with frequent comprehension checks, use scaffolding throughout the lessons and units to build and reinforce skills. Amy, to answer your question, this PowerPoint will be available on the socialstudies.com website with the webinar, and I'll also be glad to share it with you too if you just want the electronic copy of it. So let's look at each of these particular points and let's think about what this means in the context of English language learners. So build background knowledge. Honestly, sometimes this seems like common sense, but I want us to kind of be intentional about thinking about when we use a variety of text, whether that's a primary source letter or our textbook or any type of written document, it is always helpful to build background knowledge before you go to the written text. So what do I mean by that? One of the ways of building background knowledge is by using visuals. Visuals, all kinds of different visuals, maps, pictures, video clips, anything you can do to provide students with that visual to build that context or schema, to use a literacy word, before they go to the reading will automatically give them something to hook that new information to. So some strategies that have worked for me in the past, gallery walk. If you look at that picture on the right side, that's a high school student. We were getting ready to study a unit on Africa, and we looked at some different pictures of different regions in Africa, and they wrote down what they noticed. So while that's a good strategy for all learners, that's really good for English language learners, is they're getting an idea in their mind before we read any of the text that came with it. Think, pair, share. I think that's a pretty common one, but anytime you can put a visual in front of them and let them talk about it with a partner. One of the barriers that you mentioned is that sometimes they're not comfortable talking in front of the whole class. So think, pair, share, or elbow partners, people call it that. Gives them a safe space to try their language, to try to talk about what they're looking at without maybe having to say it in front of the whole class. Another one I really like is picture prediction. So anytime you can put a picture out there, and I'll show you this example. This is from a friend of mine who's a high school U.S. history teacher, and she teaches a class of English language learners and struggling readers together. And she has learned that before she starts any unit, before she starts any text reading, she starts with a picture prediction. This particular example had 6 pictures. You're the boss in your classroom, you can adapt that as needed. But she puts these pictures out there and has the students generate some words in this left-hand corner of things that they noticed. And so for English language learners, they might not be able to understand all the text on all those posters, but they often put march or protest. And so you let them generate a list of words from the images, and then they predict what this reading might be about. So this is obviously a U.S. history civil rights unit, but before they even go to any video or textbook or primary source, they have a discussion of what do we think we're learning? How do we know that from the pictures? And so picture prediction is a great strategy for building background knowledge. Another way to do is a map. And anytime I pull something from Active Classroom, you will see where I got it, where the lesson came from in a particular, it's either in the top corner or on the right corner. This one is from Atlas of World History. And for this lesson, for instance, if we're teaching world history and we know we're going to talk about the Europeans coming to the New World and maybe the Columbian Exchange, this is a great map in Active Classroom that could generate a whole discussion and build some background knowledge before they start. So using the map itself is a skill, and so you might want to teach and model your thinking as you look at the map legend and see if students could work together with the partner and figure out what they think this means and what they might be learning about as they learn this age of exploration. So throughout the webinar, I will show you a lot of different examples that I just pulled from Active Classroom to show you what's there. So another way to build background knowledge for students before you go to written text is by having them generate their own question or using student-generated questions. And one of my favorite strategies to use that's so simple and it works with all grade level kids and all content areas is I notice, I wonder. And what you do is you give them a visual. So it could be a painting, it could be poster, it could be political cartoon or a video clip, and you have them write down what they notice and what they wonder about that particular image or video clip. And then what you're going to have them do next is have them search for answers to their own questions as they read. So they have generated their own questions, and the reading is focused around trying to find clues to answer those questions. So we're going to practice it. This is a template, and this is just a Word document. I'll be glad to share this too as well if it's something you can use. So on the left-hand side, you would have them write down all the things they notice. So that's a very literal description of what they're seeing. And on the right-hand side of the template, you have them write what do they wonder about from what they're looking at. So let's practice. So this is where I need you to give some feedback. And this is actually a painting pulled out of Active Classroom. Some of you may recognize it. It is John Gass' American Progress. It comes from History Unfolding series. But if you will use the chat feature and either tell me something, you can choose. Tell me something you notice in this painting or something you wonder about. So you can pick I notice or I wonder. And I'll be quiet and let you add your thinking to this. We got I notice buffalo. I notice power lines being added by the woman. It almost looks like she's pulling them with her, I think. I noticed settlers and natives. I can tell my audience has some background knowledge about this content. Anybody want to type in I wonder? Sometimes when I use this with students, they say, I wonder what those lines are. They may or may not know the telegraph lines or the power lines. So this is a great introduction to Manifest Destiny, to Going West. Students will say sometimes, I wonder who the Native Americans are and why they're running. Thanks, John. I wonder why the clouds are gray and everything is going left. Or I wonder why it's light on one side and dark on the other. So you could have a whole conversation with students, either in small groups or partner teams where they get practice talking about what they're looking at in a safe environment. Wonder where these people are coming from and where they are going. That's a great question, Devin, that could guide your whole westward expansion unit. So let's look at this in active classroom. And I want to show you what this looks like if you are new to Active Classroom or haven't used this feature. Anytime you pull up an image in Active Classroom, there is an image examiner tool. And if you click on it, I'll show you a few things. There's a magnifying glass that will let you, we're not doing this live, we're doing this with screenshots. So it'll let you take it around the painting and focus in on a particular part. Or there's the picture quadrants. And when you click on that particular one in the image examiner, it enlarges one of the quadrants so students can look at those images. Let me go back. Let me flip quickly. Or you can do the whole screen and take the image to the whole screen. So it's also I want to point out too that Active Classroom will work if you are in a one-to-one environment. You could assign this digitally and let students use those image examiner tools, or you could do simply what I've done in this PowerPoint, and I inserted that image in so that we could look at it and talk about it as a whole class. So however your classroom is set up with technology, these resources will work. So we would have a whole list once we came up with our own thinking and then we talked with our partner, we would have a whole list of I notice and I wonder questions. Then we could introduce the text. So this particular reading is from Power Basics, and if you haven't looked at that series, that's a great series for English language learners. It's anywhere from about a 4th to 6th grade reading level, and I'll show you several examples of that. This particular one is Birth of a Nation, Westward Expansion. Well, now I know that you at your desk have a list of I notice and I wonder questions. Now we're going to go to the text. If I assign this to you digitally in Active Classroom, I can have you go to the highlighting annotating tool, and let's look at what that looks like. I have set this up ahead of time, but I want you to read this text and I want you to look for examples that might answer your I wonder questions. So if you notice, I customized the assignment to fit that I notice, I wonder strategy. So I want you to highlight interesting facts or answers to I wonder questions. So students, as you make that assignment, would have a very specific thing that they are looking for and the reason that they are reading for, but it's all focused around their own questions. So let's look at what that looks like from a student point of view. You highlight a sentence, and I just made an example of the new invention since it's the telegraph line, since we mentioned that. And then as a student, this is a student screen, I would code that as the green one because that was a question my group had, and I could type in an annotation, and I just made this up. I noticed the railroad lines running across the land. Wasn't sure what it was telegraph lines, railroad and lines running across the land. So the student can highlight and annotate both, and those are all active reading strategies. Here's what it looks like from a student point of view if you have some blues and some greens on that customized assignment. And if you notice over on the left-hand side, the annotations will pop up there. So the students can see what they've collected as their annotations. As a teacher then, you can go in, and this is what a teacher screen would look like. You would click on the annotation the student had made, and you will see the highlight, you will see the annotation, and you can give them notes and give them feedback on their particular comments. So that in itself is a great way of seeing how students are tackling the reading. It could be that sometimes they say, I don't understand this, and that would be a good place for you to teach individually there. Again, if you don't want to assign this digitally or don't have those resources, you could print out this reading and give students a highlighter or 2 highlighters and do it exactly the same way. So the key is that we were building our answers to our own questions. So we generated some background knowledge using the painting, and then we went to the text and we looked for answers to our questions. So for the custom highlight screen, I put this up here just to show you what that looked like. If you have not done this as a teacher in Active Classroom, as you make the assignment, you can customize your highlights, and these particular 4 things are already built in the system. If you want to use them, if you don't, you just delete those and you add what you want. So as I created that assignment, I put in a highlight color and I said I wanted you to look for examples that would answer your I wonder questions. So that's how you customize highlights. You could have them highlight words they don't understand. You can just set that up based on the needs of your students. Okay, second big idea, have a clear purpose for lessons and use active reading strategies. And we've been talking about those active reading strategies. As a teacher, I think the first step of this on this first bullet is you yourself need to know the purpose of the lesson. Are you really trying to work on reading skills with this lesson? Are you trying to work on content knowledge? Or more than likely, you're working on both of those together. So having that articulated in your own mind helps you design a lesson that will be clearer and easier to master for students. So from a student point of view, what are we doing this lesson for? Are we trying to read this text to answer our own questions, like our notice or I wonder? We are using text too. Or I have a colleague who happens to be a literacy professor, and she says, don't ever make a reading assignment unless you're going to have them do something with it. And she will always say, read and. So tell students, what do you want them to do? Read and highlight, read and annotate, read and look for main ideas. And I thought, that's a cute, catchy way to remember that. Or maybe simply we're doing this lesson and we're doing this text because we're trying to understand our learning target or our goal or our central question, whatever verbiage your school uses for that. Make sure you're real clear about that with students. Social studies especially sometimes has a lot of content, a lot of stuff, and sometimes as a teacher we know where we're headed, but sometimes making that very clear, especially to English language learners, is really important. So why are we reading this text? What are we supposed to be learning? What are our look fors or our listen fors? If you can be real intentional about that as you make assignments for English language learners, they'll be more successful. So what does that look like in Active Classroom? This particular series is from a Texas Studies lesson on Civil War and Reconstruction. So in Active Classroom, many of the lessons have those big ideas or essential questions already built in. For instance, on this particular one, this whole lesson and series of readings, and if you're new to Active Classrooms, your individual readings and your teacher materials are on this left bar as you pull up your Active Classroom search page. But notice that every reading in this particular series of lesson ties to one of those 4 big idea questions. So Active Classroom has some of that built in there for you already. So to the videos, if you want to use a video in Active Classroom, they all have some key ideas or main idea type of questions, and that you are looking for details to support that main idea. So this is our look for, listen for. As you assign this to students, either whole class or digitally one-on-one, they are watching the video and listening for main idea and supporting details. That's our purpose. Third big idea is always teach and reinforce content vocabulary. And we know that is a challenge. That was one of our barriers that we talked about at the beginning. Sometimes complex academic vocabulary is brand new to students. And that's true to all struggling learners sometimes, but especially English language learners. This particular series that I pulled out for this example is Power Basics, and that's the series we talked about earlier that is great for English language learners. It's mostly 4th to 6th grade reading level, but notice that in each of these lessons in Power Basics, whether you're doing geography or U.S. history or world history, they have words to know. So they are very specific about that, teaching the content vocabulary up front. And if you notice, they are bold and bright colors with the definitions before students even start the text. So the same lesson, you'll see those particular vocabulary words are here in the bright colors, the same ones that were the words to know at the beginning, and they're also bright visuals, so it helps students understand the content they're reading. If you notice in these Power Basics, they are short sentences with not difficult content vocabulary most of the time. So the passages are lexiled out for appropriately reading level for 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. Notice also that there usually is a teacher's guide or graphic organizers in each of these lessons to help you figure out how to adapt those or differentiate these for your students' needs. For instance, this is just a screenshot of some that I pulled up from the Power Basics Europe and the Texas Studies series. So these are downloaded as PDFs usually, but notice it has ways to differentiate this content. It has ways to reinforce to give students extra practice and extra support. This particular one had strategies for creating a vocabulary organizer that you could use as they read through that. That was the Texas Studies Union and Confederacy lesson. So always teach and reinforce vocabulary. Next big idea, and I think these are kind of overlapping a little bit, but next big idea is often long texts are really challenging for English language learners and struggling readers. So to chunk the text into smaller sections helps them with mastery and then automatically build in frequent comprehension checks. So for instance, if there is a one-page reading, it might be something you want to assign into chunks. You could do that digitally, or you could do that just simply drawing lines, 1, 2, 3, 4 on a handout that you give them. And they might read and discuss the first chunk of text and see if they had any questions, and then read and discuss the second chunk of text. So the whole reading task doesn't seem overwhelming. Provide opportunities for students to talk about what they read. That could be in a small group setting with a couple of peers. That could be that turn and talk we talked about earlier with elbow partners. Give them practice with skills of summarizing and discussing main ideas. And often we know that's a skill that takes practice, practice, practice. But one of the strategies, I put this on here because this worked for me. One strategies I used to use with high school students was what I called very important points, or VIPs. And it sort of came about, it's not anything new. I didn't create it. You can Google it and there'll be lots of ways to do it. But I realized that my students, when I had them highlight or underline the main idea, they were just highlighting all down the page in bright greens or purples or whatever their highlighter color was, without any concept of exactly what was the main idea or why that was important. So I started using VIPs, and for each reading I assigned them, they could pick 2 VIPs or 5 VIPs. It depended on the size of the reading, and you could only pick whatever number I gave them. So they had to make a decision about what was important and why. Once they read that and did their own VIPs, then they would talk to a partner or a small group and explain why they picked that as the main idea. So that gets your higher level reading skills in there as they talk to each other. And that would work great with English language learners as they sort of test the language with the partner and why they picked a VIP from a paragraph, for instance. Hopefully that's something you can use. That one's easy to adapt to a variety of situations. So what it looks like, some examples, an active classroom. This is the Power Basics Europe. Frequent comprehension checks are built into the small passages. So especially in these series like short text or Power Basics, the readings are chunked into small pieces with frequent comprehension checks that are a variety of question types. Next big idea, this is our last one, and this has a variety of things in it, but use scaffolding through lessons and units to build skills. So if you look at our little graphics on the bottom, we all have the same goals. We want students to be independent learners and thinkers. Sometimes that task seems daunting, and we as teachers need to build in scaffolds or supports to help students get there. And this is true of all struggling learners, but specifically those that are trying to master English as they learn our content as well. So a variety of these strategies will work based on individual kids and their needs, and based on the content and how you're running your classroom. I also feel like I need to put a cautionary statement in here, because it's really important to remove the scaffolds or supports as students begin mastering the language and the content. So, for instance, use text at different lexile levels. If students are struggling with learning the language and need that lower level lexile text, it's great to start with that. Hopefully by the end of the year, they would still not be using those lower level texts, because our goal is to get them eventually to grade level and to be successful with grade level text. So I guess that's the disclaimer here, is make sure that you don't leave the scaffolds in for too long. Our goal is to build independent skills. That's the same point kind of with translations in native languages. If that is helpful as students begin to tackle content and learning the English language, by all means use it, and I'll show you how those are built into Active Classroom. But eventually you pull back the scaffolding, you pull back the supports. Include graphic organizers to help with content mastery. Include different types of text as you think about planning a unit. Think of that thing we started with at the beginning of videos, maps, primary and secondary sources. How can you build a variety of texts into a unit where you get some visuals, you get a variety of different reading levels, where students are learning the content in a variety of ways. The last one is probably the most powerful one, I think, and that is model your own thinking. Sometimes I think all students think we as teachers just know all the stuff. We have magic abilities in our brain and we can understand everything we read. We laugh at that and we know that is not the case. But how do we show that to students? And if you have not used Think Alouds, I really encourage you to use that with your students. What that looks like is you just model your thinking when you read a piece of text. So you could put that on a document camera. You could you read along with them with highlighters, but think out loud of what you do when you get to a word that you don't understand, or how you use context clues to help figure out a difficult sentence. Or if you're like me, sometimes you get to the end of the paragraph and you have no idea what you just read because your brain was thinking of 15 other things. So go back and reread and model that for students. So that's a Think Aloud. If you have not used that, there are a lot of examples of that online as well. So feel free to check that out. And gradual release, if you are not familiar with that, is a really powerful way of designing a lesson, in that gradually you build back the scaffolds and supports. And it's sometimes called I do, we do, you do, so that whenever we're tackling a task, we might be reading and looking for some answers. I would read that first paragraph possibly aloud and model my thinking. And then maybe on the second paragraph, you work on that with a partner, so you're not alone and you're trying to figure out those main ideas with a partner. And then eventually we want to build independent skills. So I do, we do, you do. If you think about how do I set up lessons or units where that modeling is built in, that is powerful for English language learners. That may take more practice, more time for different kids. So that's another, you kind of adapt to your own students' needs. So let's see what that looks like in Active Classroom. So to use a variety of different text levels, just to point it out, if you have not seen this, the lexile levels are included on any particular lesson in Active Classroom that has a reading. There are text-to-speech toolbars. If you are not familiar with this, you're going to love this if you have English language learners. You click here to open the text-to-speech toolbar and it drops down. And read my chat screen. It drops down a bar that looks like this. You click here and then it will read aloud the text in English if you choose to do that. It also tracks the reading so students can follow along as it's tracking. If you want it translated, you click here on the globe. If you want a definition, you click on the dictionary. If you want a picture definition, we know those non-linguistic representations are powerful for students. So let me show you some examples of what that looks like. If we're going to say, for instance, studying world history, and we're going to study ancient Greece. This is from Exploring World History. You first highlight a passage, and then you click on your text-to-speech toolbar. It will, if you click here, it will read to you in English. If you want it translated in the student's language, and this is where if students are on a computer and they could have their headphones, you click on the globe. It will translate what you did for your highlighting. And I have mine set as Spanish, so my example, my screenshot here is Spanish. So I did all the highlighting for this particular passage. You can see that in blue, and I hit translate, and this is the box that pops up. It will read to students. If you click there on the play button, it will read in their native language. Again, a scaffold built in as students kind of learn the content and learn the language. Dictionary example, this is from that same reading. I did the highlight for merchants because I'm not sure what that content vocabulary word means. And I can click on dictionary and it gives me a dictionary definition. I can click on the picture and it shows me a picture of merchants. To change the language, you go to the setting wheel and it drops down a screen that looks like this. And there are 14 different languages built into Active Classroom. So great resource for your English language learners. So let me quickly kind of wrap this up by thinking out loud with you as if how am I gonna do all this? It seems like a lot. How do I plan for this? If I'm planning I just took world history, like a middle school world history class where I'm studying ancient cultures. How do I plan this unit or a little couple of days lessons maybe? I could use decision making in ancient history, which is one of my favorite series in Active Classroom, because you read, you talk, you make a decision, you back it up with evidence. It just has so much built in that series. But these kind of things can work in almost any series that you choose. In this particular one, it's called Where Would You Settle? And it gives you 3 different cultures. You don't know this as you look at it. I'm going to click to the next screen and show you. Like Society A is one place, Society B is another place, and Society C is a third ancient civilization. And you've got to read and you've got to figure out where would be the best place to settle. Notice the vocabulary words there are in blue. So I would, you could differentiate the text if you wanted to. There's a short version and a long version of each of these readings that you could assign to students. I would build some background knowledge before we started by brainstorming what's a civilization, and several thousand years ago, what would we want to have in our civilization, and build some of that vocabulary before I ever gave them the reading. And then I would maybe model a paragraph of Society A together. So we're building those scaffolding skills by modeling. I would give them that read and annotate. See if you can figure out clues for what this culture is about and where it's located. And then I want to talk with a partner, talk with a person, your elbow partner about what you just read. So they're practicing that language, they're practicing that oral communication. And then maybe you divide it up where different students read Society A and Society B, and you have them come together and you have them give some of the main ideas from what they read, and they choose which they think is the best place to settle. So multiple places in there, they're talking to somebody about what they read. And let's see what that looks like. So here's how it ends. This is one of those comprehension checks at the end. Once they've all shared a little bit about their culture, they as a little mini group could decide which place would you choose to live and what are some reasons for your choice. So that was just kind of me thinking aloud if I want to build in these supports and build in these strategies for a sample 2-day lesson. If you're new to Active Classroom, and I'll do this quickly because I realize our time is long here, you search. How do you find these things? You search under activities. You can use a keyword search if you want to search for a topic. You can also use the advanced search bar and search by subject or era and theme or series title or activity type. Show you a few of those. If you know, oh, I like those Power Basics that we looked at tonight because I like the reading level of those, you can search by series, and you would come in the series menu and scroll down to Power Basics or short text, and that's how you search by series. You can also, sorry about that, you can search by activity type. You just want a video, and that's where you search here in that advanced search bar. You just know you want a reading, or you want a map or an image. Search by activity type. If you need help, you need assistance with any of this, there is on the help screen, if you hit on the question mark, takes you to this help screen, and there's a contact us button or a variety of video tutorials, professional learning to show you how to use some of those features that I just quickly went through with you in Active Classroom. Questions or comments from anybody, or ideas, things that have worked with you and your students? I'll wait just for a few minutes and see if anybody has any questions, but let me put my contact information up here. Here's my email if you're interested in the PowerPoint. Like Melissa told you, this will be on socialstudies.com's website, the webinar. But if you would like the PowerPoint or that I notice, I wonder, you're welcome to have that as well. Just email me, and I'll be glad to email you any of that information. Any questions or comments before we wrap up?
Jenna, that was a lot of ideas on ways to meet all students' needs. I'm very impressed. You've put the learning into the students' hands. You have activated learning with them, and I am just really excited to try some of these ideas.
Thank you.
All students, so I really like that. This can be used with a lot of strugglers and different types of students. I also saw that Amy loved your image, and there's a discussion board in Active Classroom, and I think it'd be a great idea to use that type of idea as a way to comment and way to respond. So you could love or question or laugh. So I was thinking of that at one point too.
Great idea.
But once again, we thank everyone for joining us tonight. We hope to see Jana again in the future webinar and all the participants that we had tonight.
Thanks, everybody.
Again, thank you, and we'll see you next time. of our participants left. So what'd you think? Oh,
I think I probably did. Do you think I did too much too fast? That's what I told Pam. It had like 5 things in all those screenshots. I don't know. Should I have shortened it? Because that was 45 minutes.
no,
Maybe 40. I think we got started 5 minutes late, but I don't know. Is
exactly.
that too much?
I don't think so because they can always look back.
Okay.
So if they got a little overwhelmed, they're going to have, you may send them, if they request the uh, slides, you may send them that and they can always look back. But also, I'm scouring and listening for the ideas that I want. So maybe everything wasn't even applicable. So I think you really hit a lot of great ideas.
Well, and Pam wanted me to show them how to search and how to ask for help. So,
Right,
I added all that at the end too. That probably could have been cut, depending on the audience. But
right.
okay. It's really hard for me to do 30 minutes. I think I get wound up and but I told her that, so I think it's gonna be more like 40-ish. She said that's okay.
Well, it said on something 3 to 5. It said 5 to 6. So
Okay.
I
So
didn't,
we're
I
okay.
didn't know exactly. I was going to say something, but you started wrapping it up at 45. I figured that's probably usually the max time to
Yeah.
happen. But
And I
so
think I
hit
think
right
most of them typed a comment in there at one point in time.
every person, and it showed that Leslie was not paying attention. She was probably listening but doing other things, which I do a
Yeah.
lot. So
Yeah, I
that's
do too.
why
I
she
do that too.
was though.
Well, thank you for introducing me and hanging with me.
Thank you, Jana. You did great.
Well, do you
You
have any like suggestions before the next time I do it? Like maybe shorten a little bit. Um,
I don't. It depends on the material. I
okay.
think this is understandable. I knew exactly what you were saying, and you hit a lot of different areas. And you're not only helping ELLs, but you're helping strugglers or um, disabilities. So I think it was good. Wasn't getting tired or, feeling like, oh, she needs to wrap it up, or I would have said something if it was starting to
Okay,
get.
I do. I really want you to do that. I hope you know you won't never hurt my feelings. Well, it's still so weird to me to be talking and not seeing people.
I know.
I'm just still not used to that. Like it's weird. If people were smiling at me, I'd be better. But um,
I know. Well, I'll send you a
it'll
picture.
get easier, right?
I'll send you a picture of
That's what
this.
I need. I just see your smiling face.
That's right.
Well, you
Well,
you feel better, and I hope we get to be at the same place soon someday. You
yes,
know.
I do too. I feel like it'll
Okay.
happen. You have a
Get
great night.
some rest. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.